My father has always been horrible to me. Right from a very young kid, it was clear to me that he was not interested in being a dad. But I never could figure out which he hated more, being married to my mom or being a father to me. I think he must have hated it equally since he did not treat my mother any better than he treated me. I turned 17 a couple of months ago, and just 4 weeks back, I lost my mother. It was not unexpected. She had been fighting with lung cancer for quite some time, and she finally succumbed to it in the hospital 4 weeks back. She'd been diagnosed 3 years ago, and since then it felt like I had been holding my breath. And when she passed away, I think I finally let it all go. She was my best friend, and even now it feels really surreal to not have her around. Most importantly, she was the only person who was there to protect me from my father. I grew up in a house where every single day my parents would fight over something or the other. It was very clear that they did not love each other. And I honestly don't even know why they were married. Every time I asked my mother why she had married him, she would tell me that they had loved each other at some point. They would always make up. But I was never able to forgive my father as quickly as my mom did. I had advised her to leave him several times because sometimes when they were fighting, he would say absolutely horrible things to her. He would say things like how he regretted ever being with her and having a child with her, and he wished she'd passed away from her disease so he could move on with his life. I would tell her to leave repeatedly, but she just refused, and I don't know why. As for me, I had wanted to leave ever since I was 4 years old, but I had nowhere else to go and no other family either. My mother was an orphan who had lost her parents in an accident when she was literally a kid and had been raised by her grandmother, who passed away when she was in college. She did not have any other family members who she was in touch with, and I did not know my father's side of the family because he never took us to meet them. He claimed that he did not get along well with his family, which is why he did not want us to meet them. There was no elaboration, and I was too scared to ask him. I was used to getting yelled at for things, so I wasn't going to paint a target on myself by prying into something like that. Anyway, my parents were the only family that I had, which is why I had to deal with my father because my mother refused to leave. After she passed away, I was devastated. But my dad went about his business like nothing had even happened. It was not surprising to me in the slightest because even when she was sick, he had been acting the same way. I did not expect him to care because I knew that he did not love anybody. He was probably not even capable of that. But what really surprised me is that just 2 weeks after my mother had passed away, once we were done with the funeral and formalities, my dad brought home a much younger woman. She was just there one morning, sipping coffee in our living room. And when I mustered up the courage to ask my father who she was, he told me that she was my new mother, apparently. He also had the biggest smile on his face, probably his creepiest one yet, when he was telling me that. In spite of myself, I couldn't help but comment on it, and I told him that it was a bit too soon to bring home his girlfriend, since it had been just 2 weeks since my mother had passed away. And that earned me a lecture from him about how this was going to be my stepmom in a few days, and so I needed to respect her. He told me that he did not care that I had just lost my mother. I had to respect her the same way and treat her just like I had treated my own mom. I was beside myself with anger, and I tried to argue with him. So he dropped another bombshell on me and told me that he was getting married. He said that ever since my mother's diagnosis, he had known that she would not be able to make it because she had always been weak and fragile ever since he had known her. So he had started looking for replacements. That's literally the word that he used since then. And he had been with Melissa, his girlfriend, for the past 2 years. He told me that Now that my mother was finally out of the way, he was going to get married again, and he was going to make sure that her passing did not affect his life in any way. It finally made sense why he had been unaffected by my mother's sickness and death so far, because he had replaced her. I was disgusted and honestly just repulsed by him. And I told him that I would not be attending the wedding. And I expected him to say that he was fine with that because honestly, why would he care? But then he told me that it was necessary for me to attend. So that took me by surprise. And when I asked him why that was, he told me that only if I attended would he be able to make this seem normal and acceptable to other people. Apparently, according to him, me being present at the wedding would mean that I had accepted it. And if his own daughter did not have a problem with this marriage, nobody else would have any reason to comment on it either. So basically, he needed me to be there so it would seem less depraved, which in itself was pretty psychotic. I honestly believe that my father had lost his mind, since not only was he saying such weird and senseless things, but he was also getting married just 2 weeks after his wife had passed away, without caring about what other people would say. And not just that, the woman marrying him was just a couple of years older than me. She was 25 at most. I don't know her exact age, but she couldn't be older than that, and my dad is in his late 40s. It's creepy enough as it is that the fact that this guy is somebody who recently lost his wife to cancer and should be grieving right now, but is instead getting married and expecting his daughter to pretend like this is all normal and that she supports it. It's a total recipe for disaster, and I really think that he belongs in a straitjacket in a padded room. When he told me that he was marrying Melissa, I told him that there was no way I could be attending this wedding, and if he wanted to get offended at that, he was welcome to do so. But then he told me that he would not just be getting offended, he would be kicking me out if I did not attend. And he would also make sure that I did not get access to the college fund that him and my mother had been setting aside for me ever since I was born. I thought that it was majorly unfair because, like he had said, it was not just his money that had gone into the college fund, but also my mom's. And I believe that I was entitled to it. But unfortunately, I could not force him to hand over that money to me since it's not required by law to do so. It was not like he had set it up specifically for that use since there were no documents to prove it. So basically, if I did not attend that wedding, I would be getting kicked out and I wouldn't have any prospects of going to college either. I was in a really difficult situation because on one hand, I did not want to seem like I was part of this or that I was encouraging this insanity in any way whatsoever. But on the other hand, I also had to look out for myself because there was still a couple of months to go before I left for college, and I couldn't afford to lose out on money since I did not have any of my own. And it would take some time for my mother's will to get processed, and only then would I get the inheritance. So for now, it did not seem like I had any other option but to attend the wedding and make it seem like I was supporting my father. I was told about the wedding last week, but I honestly couldn't bring myself to accept it. So I decided that I had to go all out in order to stop this from happening, or at least try to do something. To his face, I told my father that I would be attending the wedding, but then I started trying to look for something, anything, to disrupt what was going on because I just couldn't bring myself to allow this to happen. I honestly didn't even know what I was looking for. I just wanted something. And I got really lucky, like miraculously lucky, when my father left his laptop unattended. Him and Melissa went out for dinner a couple of days back to celebrate the fact that they were getting married, and I was alone at home. My dad had left his laptop on the coffee table. I did not expect anything when I opened it since it was locked, so I just tried to guess the password, and luckily I got it right. It was Melissa's name followed by his own birthday, which was weirdly shocking. Anyway, once I was in, I could barely even believe it. I started going through his social media, and initially I found nothing, but then I realized that he had two profiles on Facebook, and I decided to go through the other one, which I had not seen earlier. To my surprise, that was his secret account, just for his side of the family. He had been telling my mother and me that he did not get along with his family. But here he was on his other profile, hanging out with people we had never seen before who looked like they were definitely related to him. The more I scrolled, the more photos I found, dating back 2 years ago. It was very obvious that he had been in touch with his family all along, and he had just been lying to us. And then I decided to go through his messages on that account, and I found out that he had been in touch with his parents for a really long time. I'm guessing he also had another phone. He had essentially been leading a double life right from the beginning, and nobody had a clue. My mother and I had never known about any of this, and even if she had known, she had never told me about it. And I was pretty sure that his family had no idea that I even existed. After going through his conversations with his father on his account, I realized that his father thought that he was living away from home for work and nothing else. Little did he know that he had a whole family here. I quickly took photos of those chats and went onto my own phone so I could speak to my grandfather. I was quite nervous because I had no idea if he would even believe me, because all of this was so ridiculous. I could barely even believe it myself. Nevertheless, I went to my room and I logged into my own Facebook account and contacted the profile that I had seen on my dad's account. Just as I had suspected, there had been zero mutual friends, which is why I had never been able to find him. I hadn't even known my grandfather's real name for all these years, which is why I had never been able to track these people. Now that I had his account, I messaged him immediately and tried to explain everything as quickly as I could. I gave him my phone number and told him to contact me as soon as he could, because this was an emergency. I attached some photos of the screenshots that I had taken explaining that this is how I had been able to track his profile. And I also attached some photos of me with my parents so that he would know that this was a prank on him. I did not get any response for the next 12 hours, and I had almost given up because I had thought that maybe he believed that somebody was playing a prank on him and had decided not to respond to me. But when my dad was at work, I finally received a call from my grandfather. I was just lucky that he had not talked to my father about this and had called me before that. Anyway, as soon as he called me, I answered my phone and I explained to him what was going on. He told me that for the past 17 years, he had been led to believe that my father was living away from Iowa, which is where he was originally from, for his work. He had even visited his son several times, and apparently my dad had a separate house and everything here, which is where my grandparents had stayed whenever they visited him. They did not have the slightest clue about any of this for the past 12 hours, and they had just been trying to recover from the shock of it all. Initially, this all seemed like a prank to them, but when they saw my mother in the family photos that I had sent, they realized that it was all true. Apparently, the reason that my father had never told his parents about his marriage and the family that he had was because he had told him that he had broken up with my mother since they did not approve of her. 18 years back, when my parents had initially started dating, my grandparents had made it very clear that they did not want my father to marry my mother, and so he had told them that he had dumped her, and that's the lie that he had been peddling for the past 2 decades. But now, he had finally been caught. The reason that my grandparents had not wanted my father to marry my mother was a pretty serious one. It was because my mother had apparently been trying to cheat on him, and they had accused her of being a gold digger. And that was because the first time that my father had brought my mom home to meet his parents, She had immediately tried to hit on his older brother since he was a surgeon and obviously earned way more than my father. However, my grandparents had found out about it because my uncle refused to keep his mouth shut about something so serious. And they had demanded that my father break up with my mother, but he refused to do so. And I think that it was because of me, because according to my calculations, my mother was probably already pregnant by the time. And then my parents gave him an ultimatum that he could either break up with my mother or they would cut him out of their lives, since they knew that if they cut him off, my mother would leave him because they believed that she was just with him for the money. My dad eventually told him that he had broken things off with my mother, but clearly not, since they continued to stay together, and that's why I'm here. I don't know why they stayed together if my mother had actually done such things, and this completely changed my perception of both my parents. Anyway, once I got to know these things, I told my grandparents how poorly I was being treated and that I could not count on anybody else. But now that I knew that they existed and I wasn't as alone as I had initially believed, I was counting on them for help. But if they turned their backs on me, I would still understand. Thankfully, they chose to help me out, and I was able to stop the wedding from happening, and I got back at my father as well, and so did his parents. They flew down here a couple of days ago, and yesterday I managed to sneak them into the wedding, and all of a sudden, we were the guests of honor. The wedding was being held in our backyard since only a couple of people were attending. It was meant to be a small and intimate ceremony. It was just my father's co-workers and employer, a couple of his friends, and that was it. Obviously, he had not invited his family. They hadn't even been invited to his first wedding, but I made it possible for them to attend the second. After Melissa had walked down the aisle and everything, I texted my grandparents and I told them that it was finally time for them to show up because I wanted to stop this before the vows happened. Right before the vows, I snuck out, and then it was my turn to walk down the aisle with my grandparents, just for the theatrics of it all. As soon as my father saw me walking down the aisle with his parents, his face fell, and Melissa looked pretty confused as well. Once I was near him, I announced to him that I had finally uncovered all his lies, and now his parents knew the truth. So he could say goodbye to his inheritance because that was not coming to him anymore. It was all coming to me instead. And I did not need him anymore either, since I already had a place to live and people to take care of me, and also my college fund. So he could do whatever he wanted, since I knew that he was a liar, and I did not wish to be associated with him. After that, I walked away with my grandparents, and since then, we have been living in a hotel, preparing to go back. There's a lot of catching up that I have to do with my grandparents since I haven't known these people, and there's also so much to talk about regarding my parents. The only reason we haven't returned yet is because this morning my father finally contacted my grandfather and told him that what he did was just not right. And he had apparently accused his parents of trying to control him his entire life and never letting him be happy. He also accused me of trying to ruin him by showing up at the wedding like that, saying that I just couldn't stand to see him happy with anybody else. He's blaming us all because now Melissa is refusing to talk to him, and the wedding was obviously called off yesterday itself, just after we had left. So AITA for showing up to my father's second wedding with his parents and exposing him for being a liar? Update 1. Hi, it's been 4 days since the wedding got called off. My grandparents and I decided not to respond to my father. He does not deserve it. If he wants to speak to us, he knows where to find us. We are still staying at the hotel. We've given him the details of it and have told him that he wants to discuss things with us. He can visit us and then we can talk in person, but this is not the kind of discussion that we want to have over the phone or via text. He still hasn't shown up yet, and there's only 3 days before I go back to Iowa with my grandparents. They have a farm there. And they're pretty well off, and I will be taken care of far better than I was here. They promised me that they're going to make sure that I got to go to college of my choice and I wouldn't have to suffer after this. My grandparents have been literally doting on me ever since we got to know each other, and I think they're trying to make up for lost time, which is pretty sweet of them. They hated my mother, and after this, they hated my father as well. But they seem to love me a lot. Update 2. So my grandparents and I are supposed to leave in 2 days. This morning, my father decided to finally pay us a visit and talk to us. I was quite surprised to find him in my grandparents' hotel room when they called me this morning, but I recovered from that pretty quickly, and I decided that I was not going to speak to him the entire time until he apologized. But obviously, that's too much to expect from somebody like him. He was here only to talk about how unfair it was that my grandparents had decided that they were going to cut him out of their lives and give all the inheritance to me instead. He said that he had already lost his wife, my mother, and he had lost Melissa as well. I also did not wish to speak to him anymore, so things were pretty bad for him already. And to top it all off, all the guests who had been present at the wedding, his co-workers and close friends, are now acting weird with him because of what happened at the wedding. So his reputation is in shambles, and he is considering even quitting his job because he doesn't think that he can work in such a hostile environment. To put it mildly, he has kind of lost everything that he had until a few days ago. But then we came along at the wedding, exposed him, and then ruined it all for him. So the least that we could do for him was at least let him have the inheritance, which is something that he had been working on for all these years, because otherwise he wouldn't have lied to all of us for so long in the first place. But he just wanted to make everybody happy, which is why he had started telling lies. And he promised that he had wanted to tell his parents the truth after he got married to my mother. But then, as time went on, it just got more and more awkward to bring up. So he had to keep up with his lies and plan an elaborate double life. He claimed that he was the victim in the situation because, after all, it was his happiness that everybody was against, including his parents. So now he was only here to demand what actually belonged to him, the inheritance, since I would be taken care of anyway. But he had been hoping for this and working for this from the very beginning, and it was unfair to just take away from him for such a petty reason. I was already pissed off by the way that he was acting like he was the victim, and when he said that he deserved to have that inheritance, I completely lost it. Before my grandparents could even say anything, I burst out at him, and I said that if he really deserved that inheritance, then I had also deserved to be treated like a human being for the past 17 years. But he had never shown me any sort of love or affection or even the bare minimum respect. And he had literally threatened to kick me out and use my college fund for his own personal expenses if I did not partake in his insanity and encourage his marriage to his young girlfriend just 2 weeks after I had lost my mother. If he could not offer me anything that I deserved, it was only fair that his parents took away whatever he believed he deserved. He was pretty shocked by my behavior because I had never been able to stand up to my dad like this. But now that I had my grandparents to support me, I was not afraid of him anymore. He even tried to glare at me, which would usually work when I was younger, and try to shut me down. But this time, I was not going to shut up and just let him walk all over me. Earlier, I would only do that because I knew that my mother wouldn't leave no matter what, probably because of the same reason that my father did not cut ties with his parents. Because of the money, which proved to be pretty useless in the end since she passed away. She's only lucky that she passed away in a good hospital. But other than that, there was no benefit to her staying with my father after her diagnosis. Anyway, when I refused to shut up, my dad tried to yell at me and shut me down, but my grandparents were there to remind him that this was not going to work anymore. After a bit of arguing, he finally had to leave because my grandparents threatened to call security on him and have him escorted out. They made it very clear to him that he was not going to receive anything until he acknowledged and accepted his mistakes. And even then, it would take a lot for them to forgive him. And if I decided that I wanted to keep the inheritance for myself, he was not going to receive anything anyway. So he left, like a child throwing a tantrum, and promised that he was going to make sure that we paid the price for what we had done to him. I don't know what he thought he was doing. He probably thought that him behaving like that was going to scare us, but it really did not. It just made us even more sure that we were doing the right thing by not forgiving him. And he was not even sorry, so we can't even forgive him. I am glad that I'm leaving with my grandparents in a couple of days because I just want to get away from all of this now. I'm definitely going to miss my friends, but it doesn't matter anymore. I'm going to college in the fall. I've already graduated high school, and I'm just done with all of this now. Update 3. Hi. It's been 1 year since I left home, and for the past couple of months, I've been really busy with college, and that's why I was not able to post anything. I had pretty much forgotten about it. Anyway, after that fight with my dad in the hotel room that day, which I had mentioned in my last update, my grandparents and I left. For the next few weeks after that, we did not have any contact with my dad, but I definitely got to meet a lot of people from my father's side of the family who all love me, and I think this is the family that I had deserved all along. My mother had probably tried to love me, but she was too selfish, and in the end, it hurt me more than it hurt her. My uncle has promised me that I don't have to worry about my college tuition. He's going to have it all covered, and that's been a huge relief to me. These people had barely known me for just a few weeks, but they had already decided that they were going to give me all the love that I had been missing out for these past 17 years. And I could not be more thankful for it. I couldn't spend much time with them because a few months after I had moved in with my grandparents, I had to leave for college. But I do get to see them on weekends because the college that I'm attending is pretty close to where they are. So no complaints about that. My father has tried to reach out to me several times, not to apologize, but to remind me that I have ruined him and that I should feel guilty about it, which is why I need to talk to my grandparents and make sure that he is not cut out of the inheritance at any cost. He keeps sending me emails and messages from different accounts, but he just doesn't seem to realize that getting defensive is not helping his case. The only thing that can help him is a genuine and sincere apology. But honestly, at this point, it's too little, too late. I'm just going to stick to ignoring him, honestly. Responding to him is simply not worth it, and I don't have that kind of time or energy to indulge his delusions anyway. I finally have the family that I deserve, and I'm happy with them. I'm also enjoying my college life so far, so I'm going to focus on the positives in my life right now and try to forget about my past because I really just want to move on in life and do better for myself. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.